kids compress it like an idiot. Hello, everyone. How's it going?
All right.
Hello.
Basically, what we're going to talk about is a mixed bag of finishing tracks and Roland SH101s. I just finished some tracks and I just released them, and it was a bit of a pain along the way. And this is a conversation that I think lots of us have with each other and with ourselves. It's like, when do you know when to stop on something? When you have a sort of near limitless amount of resources of recording at home without a record label breathing down your neck in a DAW that's got everything that you need. Is it harder to finish things the more resources you have? I'm just kind of thinking this out loud right now. I didn't really plan this, but like, is that maybe a factor? Can you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, but I want to hear your story, because you finished some tracks. And did you decide from the word go that I'm going to make a track now that I'm going to finish? Or was that just one out of many tracks you just started and you had no idea that you were finishing it at the time?
I started these tracks and they were going quite well, and then they started to go a little bit shit, and I was starting to get frustrated with the process of doing it the way that I was doing, and starting to think, why did I think that this was a good idea doing it this way? So I was like, well, I've just bought this SH101 and I'm going to record these tracks that I've had in my mind for a long time, but I'll do all the parts on the SH101, not the drums, but all the music parts, the bass, the leads, the pads, everything, by recording in lots of layers, multi-tracks of the various. So rather than do a pad, which you can't, I would record the voice of the chord in 3 separate takes and 3 separate performances, and opening and closing the filter and stuff. And I thought, this is going to be brilliant. It'll be like Brian May on the SH101 or something. And then the more and more I got into it, the more I started to think, this is actually really, I actually hate this. I kind of like, why did I think that this was a good idea? So then I sort of put it off for a bit. And then I started to think, well, I've sort of I wanted to have all of these done in like March, and now it's June. So I better just get a move on. And I just made some decisions a lot quicker, and just kind of started to not care so much about it. So I suppose like how much you care about something is perhaps can make an impact on the process. It's like you often you get an idea and you're like, oh, this is great, I love this. And then it sort of gets to a point where it gets a little bit stuck. And then maybe it's in the back of your mind thinking, oh, I never finished that, or I don't really know what to do with this. And then you just kind of go, oh, that'll do, fuck off, get out of my life. And then you move on to the next thing, So
do you usually start that way? Because it sounds like the concept is like the SH101 doing all the parts apart from the drums. That was the sort of the backbone of it. Is that usually your process? Like, if you do something else, do you come up with some other concept or idea? This is what's going to drive it forward.
Yeah, sometimes there's normally a kind of gimmick for me. There's something that I'm into at that point that I think, oh, I could do an entire album this way, so I will. And then maybe I start and either that happens or it doesn't happen. And then obviously throughout the process, it kind of evolves into something different. And then you end up with something that maybe wasn't what you expected when you started, but you're still happy with it or whatever. But yeah, so on this occasion, it was like, I'm going to use the SH101. In previous occasions, it's like, right, I want to make an album where I'm playing the drums on all the tracks and I'm playing the bass guitar on all the tracks or something like that. And, in my head kind of thinks, oh, that's a great idea. But then along the way, you run into all of these problems of doing that, especially by yourself. You record a take of drums, you listen to it and you go, that snare sounds awful. What am I going to do about that? I can't do anything about that other than play them all again or something, So all of these things come out, all of these problems come out along the way. And And maybe I'm making a mistake. And maybe I should actually stop having these little, creative gimmicks and sort of approach things more kind of like a blank slate, as it were,
So your focus is more, as you said there, you pick the SH-101, or you might be play the bass or the drums. So you're choosing to put a particular instrument front and center, and that's the focal point in which everything hangs off, rather than, say, coming up just a riff on something, and that's where you base your music around. Or do you work that way as well?
Yeah, like it depends really. So like these 3 tracks were actually 3 tracks I wanted to go on a previous album I made, but they didn't happen. And they're also 3 tracks that have been in my brain for quite a long time. Some of them like 10 years at least. And I had this hard drive that died in about 2012 that had like everything, most of my projects on it from like 2005, 2004. And so there was like a huge amount of unfinished stuff that I lost, like, and my entire iTunes library. So all the bounces that I'd made and all the project files, like, gone. But there were some that stayed with me in my memory. So I was like, well, at least I can always just kind of reproduce those ideas. They're not gone forever. I've still got them in my brain. So, to start with, I kind of because they were going to be on a previous album, the one that had all the drums, the drum kit and the bass guitar and stuff, I was going to do those tracks with live drums, live bass, live guitar. But then that didn't happen. So I just thought a way to make this fresh is to just, a way to freshen up an old idea is to just use something new that I've acquired. And in this case, it was the SH-101, which is not a new synth, but it's new to me. And it introduced some new sonic palettes, I suppose, that were worth exploring.
I know you're probably more well known for Ableton, not exclusively. I know you're into the hardware as well. How did you find recording analog synthesizers, particularly an old analog synthesizer like that? Was it 40 years old? Was that?
It's about 40 years old, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really irritating. It was like really, really hard. So for one, I'm pretty sure. So there's like a tuning dial on the leftmost side of the panel, which I assume means that's center. That's in tune. So if I play a C with the tuning dial at the center, I get a C. But no, it's sort of somewhere around B flat. So when it's in tune, it's actually a semitone out of tune. So that was kind of a pain in. That was really bad. That really threw me off. And so, at first I was a little bit like, I had to do takes again and like retune them and use the tuner in Ableton and all this sort of stuff. And I was using Operator for the low end for the sub bass, and it was getting increasingly hard to tune that to Operator, to tune the SH-101 to Operator. So in some cases, actually what I did was do the MIDI and then put the MIDI down a semitone or up a semitone or whatever it was to get it in tune with the DAW. And that took a lot of time and was kind of quite frustrating. And also, like, when you factor in that, so I played the MIDI in to Ableton from the Novation, did all the MIDI clips, sent the MIDI out to the SH-101 via the CV and gate outputs on the Novation to trigger the SH-101, and then send it back in to the interface and record it that way. And there were like loads of problems with that as well. Like, I don't know if I've even calibrated this thing properly. The tracking sometimes was off. So it was basically not fun. It was kind of frustrating at times. But along the way, it did introduce some nice things. Like, all the lines are a little bit out of tune, which gives it a bit of a microtonal edge, which is, pretty trendy right now, isn't it? Everyone's interested in that stuff.
What sort of time scale are we talking? Like, from you starting making this track from being finished, roughly?
I'd say February to last week.
And how often?
When I sent the masters off to Nick like last week. So,
and how often did you work on it every week, or?
Couple of times a week, or there was maybe a month where I didn't touch them. So I would sort of do it in bits. I recorded all the takes first. I could probably open up a session. I recorded like all the 101 takes first, just to like a hi-hat or like one drum loop. And then I did a bit of like reverb, trying to find nice reverbs, and then I moved on to the drums, and then I did the mix, and that was it. So let's just have a look at this one. Let's see if this works. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah.
Can you hear that?
Yes.
So these are all, I wonder if, so these are all bounces that I did as I went along. And I think, let's put that down there. So yeah, we've got like, so here's like just the 101 bass. And then there's the lead. But these are all dry. And then the reverb track was recorded. So that's all the lines going into one reverb that I've bounced down. So that's 3 separate takes. A bit quiet, isn't it? So, I mean, these are all the bounces, but down here I've got the actual, I kept all of the sort of the project stuff. So here's like the sort of the raw, so there's lots of groups here. So yeah, these are all just like single takes of me just playing the parts like by hand. We're going to get that through. So that's like one part of the chord. And then here's another one.
So you didn't just sample one note and then just pitched it around. You actually recorded the note from the 101 and overlaid them.
Yeah, I did. So these ones here, they were done. I played it on the 101 like by hand. So
Yeah.
just like a live take. I was thinking I wished I'd just sampled a note and done it all in a sample. I could have got it.
That's
like
too easy, man. No pain, no
yeah,
gain.
exactly. So but this lead part, like the bass part and the lead, is that? Yeah. So this is actually so that's actually being triggered or was being triggered by MIDI, which it looks like I've deleted, or maybe it's this group here. Yeah, there's just loads of like groups of stuff. So at some point I must have like recorded that MIDI and then sent the MIDI back to CV. So basically the Novation is acting as a MIDI to CV converter. And so this is like, yeah, this was hand played, but then quantized and then sent back to the SH-101. But whilst it was recording, I did a little bit of pitch bend and all that. So so the sequence was running, but I was like tweaking it or whatever. So that's kind of how that went. And then I did the drums and that was a lot of just comp editing and stuff like this.
What about, there's a couple of things I want to ask actually. Like your drum programming, I thought on a couple of the tracks, particularly track 2 was very powerful. But I think just more broadly speaking, maybe first, how do you go about arranging your tracks? Because just from a perspective, a lot of people may start off with a riff or a drum or some kind of rhythm layer, but then they're 4-bar loops typically, and it's hard to break out of that for a lot of people. How do you take that seed of an idea and turn it into a track?
Well, with these tracks in particular, sort of, as I said, they're all quite old tracks that I've sort of like worked on and added extra bits in each iteration that I've tried to write them at various points. I've maybe like added other sections along the way or thought about, what, maybe extending them either this, I need another section or something like this. So I guess as that happens, as you introduce new sections, then you just kind of think about, where they go. So like in the case of like track 2, really that's actually just the same song twice in one song. It like there's the A section, then there's the B section, and then there's the A section and the B section, and the song's over. You know, it's just that they're slightly the drums take enough of a lead throughout it that for me it doesn't really matter that I'm just repeating these two sections twice or whatever, because there's enough evolution in the drums that it feels like that they kind of go somewhere. And you know, maybe there's some shifts in the dynamics or like the way that I treated the synth or whatever, that, or the reverb, you know. But it kind of really depends, I think, on what what kind of context you have. Because I think originally I wanted these to be like rock tracks, you know, like, but they were fast. They were drum and bass tempo rock tracks. So they've kind of got some of those tropes in there. Like there's a crash cymbal when you change section and stuff like this, and there's maybe a breakdown, but you know, they're at drum and bass speeds. So there's somewhere in between. Does that answer your question?
Well, I think so. You're saying that you might just have an A/B section. Is this typical of your approach? And then you're getting the interest mainly through dynamics and then playing around with sort of nuances on the lines themselves, but they're basically the same lines. Is that kind of a favoured approach, or would you go off and go totally prog on us one day and you end up with like 15 sections to a song?
Well, I wouldn't. Yeah, if I wanted to do that, and if I could find a way to do that was not stressful.
Yeah,
I think it's yeah. I suppose it all depends on the context. Like these are sort of quite poppy, I suppose, and so it sort of makes sense to have like your verse, your chorus in the simplest terms, you know. So they've got a little arc. It's not a particularly lavish one like you would get with some sort of prog magnum opus or something, but they clearly have like a little small story in there, you know, rather than it being kind of like a, I don't know, like a techno track that just slowly opens and closes over 5 minutes or something, you know. So yeah, if your intention is that you kind of want to make a song that has some sort of narrative, then yeah, you need to have like different sections and stuff, don't you? You need to have, it needs to change, it needs to go places, it needs to come back, resolve, break apart, you know, come back together and all that sort of stuff.
I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. And you mentioned earlier on, I mean, the theme of this episode is around finishing tracks. And why would you say stopped the tracks being finished previously for an album, a previous album? Weren't you happy with the riffs of it? What was showing down you weren't happy with the arrangement, or what's stopping you from finishing that? Maybe we can go on and talk about, you know, sometimes it's very quick to finish a song, and other times these things can go on for a very long time.
Yeah, I suppose it's really sort of, it's a toss-up between knowing what's missing and knowing that it doesn't really need anything more. So in certain cases, so the first track, for example, all the ideas were there. I had them already. So all I needed to do was get them down and then go, right, that's it. That's kind of done, really. I just need to, you know, do the drums and mix it and get the space to sound the way that I want it. But for like tracks 2 and 3, for a long time, they were missing things. There was like, there's a lead line that's missing, that's not giving it the identity it needs to have. There's too much space in there, and not space in the mix, but space in the sort of the amount of actual musical ideas. So when I was able to fill that gap with fresher ideas, that was a little bit of motivation to go, well, if I get this part down, that's enough, and then I can finish it. You know, I don't really need to do more than that. So there's a fine line there between over-egging the pudding and not putting enough salt in. What was that noise? Someone made a little beding.
I think it was my phone that made a ding. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right, no worries.
But do you need some form of external factor to finish stuff? Because I know, like, unless it's not a sort of a job, but like at least like I've promised to give a track to someone, or that some friends and I have decided, like, okay, this month we're going to make a track just to finish tracks. I almost need some other person to deliver to in one way or another. It's not about like exchanging money or a professional contract as such, but if I'm just doing it for myself, nothing gets finished.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting, isn't it? So yeah, you need you almost need like someone there to sort of breathing down your neck to say they're there kind of going come now, come on, you got to deliver, you got to deliver that thing. So
we did that. We started last year because a couple of friends and we said that we're never finishing anything. So should we just do like every month we should have finished a track? It doesn't matter how good or bad it is, but just practicing finishing stuff. And that made us just finishing more tracks. And I think it has made me better at finishing tracks.
I think you make an excellent point, and we've discussed this not on the pod before, but the idea of just a little bit. I got to know Ned about a year ago, and my first ask from him was help me finish some tracks. And like the thing that helped the most was to set a deadline. And that deadline was the More Kicks Than Friends session. It's like, okay, well, you're on the list, it's up to you. And I found that to be really useful, having a deadline, because same as you're saying, Philip, I will just fiddle with stuff. I'll have a great reason, and I'll spend months and months on something, and then I'll get bored with it. And so I think this is a really interesting area, like what motivates people to finish things, like, because is it a deadline, or are people some people within the group are quite disciplined. They will turn out a reasonable amount of work with a level of reliability.
But it needs to be it almost needs to be a deadline that is not just mine. It needs to be some other factor in this deadline. I can't just make one up, because if the deadline is just for me, then it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Is there maybe like a sort of like a level of paranoia there that you're letting someone down if you don't do it?
Yeah,
and you'll be a disappointment to them and you.
Yes.
You've let yourself down, you've let everyone else down. So that, I mean, yeah, that's sort of like a healthy paranoia, I suppose, in that sense. It's like, I have to finish it, otherwise this person's going to think I'm not reliable or talented, And
well, this makes people incredibly resourceful. When they get to it, when using the example, like I got my set ready for you, Duncan, just 24 hours before, and they said, oh great, okay, thanks for the music. And you said, where's the video? And I was like, video, what do you mean? You're in the video? And they're like, yeah, where's the video? And I was like, okay, leave me with that one. So after an hour or so of crawling around my garden pretending to be a cat, and this is a true story, in the dark, thinking this will look cool, a cat sneaking around, I realised this was a really bad idea. And that was my introduction to Max for live, to quickly put something together in the space of a few hours. And without that deadline, you would never have gone to that effort. So again, thank you for putting down the deadline for me. But without that, I would have never opened up Max or done anything to. So I think that.
Well, yeah, maybe deadlines are a good thing. I mean, the same thing happened to me last year when I did that record for Ben in Hong Kong, where he basically asked me to give him something in 3 weeks, give him an hour's worth of material in 3 weeks, and I agreed to do it. And then the next day I was like, I don't know, why did I do that? That was stupid. But then I did it in 2 weeks because there was just this panic. And, because I have like a lot of free time now, I can just sort of stay up all night and just work on a track until it's done. And like, because of like the sheer lack of time I had, there was no room to sort of pontificate over minutia or anything like that. It was just like, go, right, done, like a typewriter, and then move on to the next thing, and then sort of take a break, look at what you've done and go, hey, this is actually all kind of quite good. This will do, So I suppose I wonder if that's kind of, if that's sort of different for people who are on like labels or something. Like there's a couple of times when I sort of listen to old engineers talking about when they recorded albums from like the 90s or something. And it's like, they recorded, the band would write the song in maybe a month, write all the songs in like a month or 2 months, and then they go in and record them in like 3 weeks. And 3 weeks was a long time to do that. And now, like when you do it by yourself, you can work on a track for like 6 years because there's no one there going, we need it now. We need it yesterday, you know.
But are you able to go back? I find it difficult to work for very long on any particular track. I work on it for a bit, and then it just gets to a point where I feel like, okay, whatever I'm doing now, it's not great, but I'm just like changing things, but it's not really making it better.
Diminishing returns for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's been times when I've just sort of smashed stuff out in 4 hours and that's it.
Yeah.
And then there's been times where, yeah, it just takes a little bit longer.
Those are sometimes my best tracks, the ones that are, you know, done in 4 hours, because, you know, you spend less time thinking about the track and just do it, right? And just get it done, and then it's done, and you don't spend hours, you know, tuning that snare, getting that one snare sound right, because you don't have time to do it, you know.
And something else I wanted to ask about was, you were saying in, you know, the first part of the process that you were working on the tracks, you thought they were really good, and then you were like, this is shit, and you weren't as interested in them, and then you kind of were like, okay, actually, I don't care anymore. I want to get this done. And I was kind of curious about that, especially with trying to get things done quickly. If you don't really end up giving yourself the time to start second guessing yourself, to even allow yourself to think this is shit. And then the other side of that would be kind of just embracing that and being like, you know what, this is garbage, so I'm just going to go for it. And you can kind of turn that judgmental voice off, because I think, at least for me, that's probably the biggest hindrance, is a judgmental voice in the background, where if I can turn that off, or be so rushed or focused that I can't even hear it, that seems to also play a huge part in actually getting anything done.
Yeah, I've got something I can add to that. So, like, there's sort of one thing that I've noticed and that I've said a couple of times to various people in the past, is that, like, even though it sounds a little bit strange, the notion that, like, you can get to a point where you actually kind of don't really like your music and you might even kind of hate it a bit. Like, it's maybe not so bad, because it could protect you from harsh criticism from people who also don't like it. So, like, if you put a track out and someone says, I thought that track was awful, you're going to think, you're never going to hate it as much as I do. So don't try and make me feel bad about it, because I've already been through this in my own mind. So, and I don't care anymore, because I'm too busy thinking about what I'm going to do next. I've moved on to the next thing now. You know, I've got all these new ideas coming about, oh yeah, I can't wait to try this thing and do that or whatever. And like, I'm done. So it's kind of a weird process, but I think, like, I just sort of think about, like, situations when someone may have worked on something so much and they've really put their love into it, and they love it, and they put it out there, and someone goes, oh, it's shit, and they're devastated. Like, I don't know how often that happens to people, but, like, I imagine that sometimes it does along the way. And so my sort of way of countering that is to kind of, have this thing of, like, it's sort of like a self-protection in a weird way. It's kind of like, nothing you have to say about this track is going to make me feel bad about it, because I already despise it.
But but when you've made something, do you ever have that where, while you're in the zone, it sounds really good, and then you listen to it the next day, it's crap, and then you listen to it 2 days later, and then it sounds pretty good again? You know, like, you haven't changed anything. It's just, the feeling about something is not constant, and I don't know what that is.
I think that's an excellent point, because I just literally yesterday, I do loads of jamming, and I've got hundreds and hundreds of jams just stored on my computer. I try and turn them into tracks, but actually you can't start to realise they are what they are. I'm just going to start pushing them out. Actually, Philip, like, I'm quite inspired by what you've been doing. You're pretty prolific at the moment. You're putting stuff out all the time, and I know you were starting to get to that. It'd be interesting to hear how you got to that point, because you alluded to that you were spending a lot of time not getting anywhere. But, like, since I've known you, I see a lot of content and videos and pieces of music coming out all the time. But I think there's an element of what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to jam, and I know it's not the best stuff. It's a bit of fun for that time, and you can also wrap that up with other tracks where you can be neurotic about them and spend ages fine tuning them. You can do both, right? Yeah, one or the other. But
I think to answer that, I've started doing something that I did during lockdown. It's sort of a bit like warts and all. I've decided like it's better to do something every day than not doing any music at all. And some days you may do something good. Some days it's just not so good. But I'm just going to so I do this thing where I put a minute's worth of music up on Instagram every day. And I've started the 1st of June. I started again. So what is it today? Like, yes, I still need to post something today. So it will be the 18th. Some of it is rubbish. Some of it is a bit more interesting, but it is just a bit of what it is. It's almost just, I'm just putting my little sort of practice and idea sessions just out there.
yeah,
That's a bit like what you're doing, Gus, isn't it? You're you're a bit of a champion of that, the sort of the micro composition.
I was, ever since I got into, or at least just the past couple weeks that I've gotten into the jitter stuff, I've slowed way down.
Oh no. It's the Max. The Max rabbit hole has got you.
Well, but at the same time, I was also like, I need a break from the Instagram rabbit hole. You know, just that I started to get sick of that like constant pressure of like, oh my God, I gotta upload something to Instagram. I gotta do it every day. I wanted to take a break from that and just kind of, I don't actually have to do that. And the Max thing was really good for, you know, just it takes so much time to put something together with the visuals that's not the exact same thing as you did in the last one. It just adds a little bit of space. But I will say that doing it for as long as I did, I absolutely saw a lot of just creative benefits from it. You know, you can use the same sample over and over and over again. There's so much in a 30-second sound. Like there's so many different ways you can twist it and manipulate it to make it sound like something completely different. And that was actually, I got really into sampling because I had so many things that I had recorded, but will likely never release, that I wanted to basically take all of that stuff and just start using it in one way or another. But yeah, definitely a fan of doing something musical, at least, you know, for a couple hours every day.
Yeah, Instagram's like the perfect platform for that in a way, isn't it? Like it's just a perfect little like space to just drop these little sort of motifs, sort of little creative moments, as it were. And I was sort of doing something quite similar myself in like the lockdown. I would sort of like pretty much most of the time before I go to bed of an evening, I might spend an hour in Ableton or Max and just no clear goal in mind, just messing about. And then if something's quite good, I'm a little bit like, well, you know, okay. Like I'm not going to do anything with this, but I'd quite like to share it with someone, you know, share it with people just as like a little thing, you know. And that's what's nice about Instagram, I think, for musicians, is that they can kind of just leave these little sort of sketches. And then, you know, you look back and you know, you might be sitting there thinking, oh, I don't make enough music. But you look back and you go, oh my God, I posted 50 1-minute clips in the last 2 months. But maybe I am prolific.
But I think the thing there is like, it's not really finishing tracks. And when I was looking back, the first time I did this, I did 100 days of 1-minute clips. That's 100 minutes worth of music.
Yeah.
But there was nothing that was finished.
Well,
I think that depends on how you define finished. Because if you're approaching it with the thought in mind, I'm going to give Instagram 1 minute worth of music, and you give Instagram 1 minute worth of music, then you finished what your goal was. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end like a traditional track does. But I was actually just talking to somebody about this the other day, because he was saying, I don't know how you post it so much. And I said, because it's just 1 minute. Like, it's pretty easy to write a poem every day. It gets pretty difficult if you're trying to write an essay every day. It turns into a completely different thing, but it's still, you're doing something. I wouldn't define that as not finishing something. It's kind of, you had a goal and you succeeded in that goal. That's the main thing.
Surely if you've shared it with the world, it's finished. Like, you're not going to revisit any of those things to develop on them, are you? They're done. Is it kind of like sort of like musical graffiti?
Yes.
In a way.
I still feel like a cop-out though, or like that I'm cheating. I want to make longer tracks with a bit of an arc, like you were saying. That's the stuff I want to learn how to finish more of.
You could do both though, right? And
Yeah.
I'm hoping that a mixture of these things leads to the better, more on a personal level, more satisfying, like putting out tracks. Yeah. But actually, there's nothing worse than doing nothing for months and months, and that feels bad too, right? So
I would certainly say that, like, that process of doing 1 minute a day, inevitably, like in each of those minutes, there is something that I get curious about that I just want to try. It could be like a micro thing, like, oh, I've never thought about doing that on the modular or in Ableton or whatever it might be. And I just do that little thing just to see what that turns into. And then when I've made more longer, complex tracks, I've used those little skills that I've sort of gained here and there, or little things.
That's an interesting point that Ned and I were talking about the other night, which was it's in relation to the album you did for Expert Sleepers, Ned, where you said you did it quickly because you had a deadline on this, but your baseline of quickly, you're factoring in 20 plus years of experience of making music, so you're quick and.
Yeah.
And I think there's something there. When you're just doing a quick jam out, you in your own head, you might be thinking, this is nothing. Anyone could do this. It's worthless. But actually, you step back and think your ability to be able to make music or create something with some kind of structure, or even something that works together, layers of stuff like that, it doesn't happen easily. You've got to put time into to be able to do this, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's like that. I think I saw like some sort of graphic designer's meme somewhere on the internet that was like, this person goes like to do a graphic design job for a client, and they do it in an hour and charge them like £1,000, and they're like, but you only did it in an hour, and it's like, yeah, but it cost me cost me thousands of pounds and 20 years to learn to be able to do it in an hour for you. So it's like it's that thing. So I suppose that it's maybe quite nice to be in a position where, like you know your abilities well enough and your equipment well enough to be able to do things quite quickly. And as much as I might be thinking, oh, I could have maybe done more, or it could have been better, you did it, and did the person like it? Yeah, they did. Okay, move on.
There's a bit of me, I don't know if anyone else recognises this. As soon as I can do something and I've kind of decoded how something is done, so then I almost feel, oh, I'm not interested now. So therefore, I'm not interested. It has no value.
The magic has gone because you have worked it out. Is that it? Like,
yeah.
There's an element of that. And so, there's kind of got to be, I suppose maybe there's got to be something, there's got to be a challenge there. There's got to be something you've got to overcome, or something you've got to learn and develop to keep you interested in it, rather than just sort of going through the motions, as it were, which sometimes I think I can hear in other artists, certainly a lot of bands. It's just like, oh, this just sounds like business as usual or something. It doesn't sound like anything's fresh or been developed here. This is just like, they're just doing muscle memory or something like that. So, I mean, with it, with the Expert Sleepers thing, I recorded a lot of those tracks half asleep because the name's Expert Sleepers. So I got up one morning, it was like 4 a.m. and I was like, I'm just going to go and record some modular and just see what happens. And then I recorded about an hour's worth of stuff, not really thinking, just really sort of half asleep in a daze, and just patching and just hitting record in Ableton. And then I went back to bed, slept for about 6 hours, got up and walked into my front room and was like, was I making music here? What's what's going on? There's like an hour's worth of stuff on my Ableton project. What's going on? And so I was like, well, some of this stuff's all right. Yeah, it's fine. And then I sent it to him and he was happy with it. So it's like, it's done, isn't it? So I suppose in that sense, it's going back to what you were saying, Philip, about having that external, I can't remember the term you used, but a sort of
some factor, like some
factor, yeah, of like that. It's like, well, if he's happy with it, then I am, I suppose, So it's done, I guess. If he'd have come back, but then I don't know what he might have. Oh no, there was actually one point I sent him a few things and he was like, I think you could do a little bit more, and I was like, damn it, he wants more. I need to. So then I just kind of made fresh things, that were more involved. But yeah,
I'm also curious, like what this group feels like. Sometimes you sort of watch YouTube, someone like I'm thinking of what's his name, Tom Cosm, I think,
yeah.
And he opens one of his projects, and it's like 100 tracks or something in there, or like what's his name, Mr. Bill or something. Like there's just so much going on, and I think like it doesn't matter how much I work. I don't think I could ever make a project with that many tracks because I wouldn't come up with that many little things to add. Like I just don't know how that works. How can you make something that complex?
I think it's
10 or something.
Yeah, with Mr. Bill, I've watched a couple of his things, and I think he's doing like a lot of his like sort of edits and stuff, his sort of micro edits, and the way that he approaches things is that like it's just put something on a new track, just add things to new tracks, and so after a while it does kind of mount up to look like that he's got like loads of tracks, but they're all just very sort of subtle things that like need to be somewhere. And in many ways it sort of makes sense. Like you've got an inexhaustible amount of tracks, just add something to another track, and yeah, I mean, it works for certain. But I'm the same. I wouldn't do it like that. I like things to be really contained. I like to get everything down to 8 tracks.
Yeah, something like 8 or 10, or like, that's it.
Yeah, and then that's really at the end. That's very much at the end. That's why I've started bouncing as I go now. So that's another sort of finishing line thing that I psychologically I think helps quite a bit. It's like, if I like the way the bass sounds, what's the point in having the session running with the plugins or the effects or whatever? It's like, print it, have it there, delete everything I used to make it, and just have the audio. And
is that why you bounce the reverb? Is just to kind of lock it into place. You can't change it anymore because you've bounced it.
Yeah, well, I mean, partly because, I mean, it was just sort of like, well, I'm bouncing everything else. I might as well bounce the reverb track. And then it's sort of less of like, how much am I bussing everything to the reverb track? It's more just like, where does the reverb track sit in the mix against the dry version or something? But also just because I just like the idea of having stems for later, in case if I play them live or something, I can chuck them in a live set and remix it in a live set or something. But yeah, it is sort of partly a psychological thing as well, that I think gets you closer to the finishing line, to just sort of make commitments like that.
Did you like have this transition to mixing, or was mixing just the part of the production all along?
But for these tracks, I definitely sort of approached it like, I'm going to mix it at the end. I mean, along the way, there were certain things that I would do, like I would maybe do like a bit of high pass filtering on snares and things like that, and high passing on because there were 2 basses. There was the sub bass and then the SH101 bass. So I would do a high pass on the SH101 bass, and I would print it like that so that I wouldn't have to mix it later. Really, all I'd like to do when I'm mixing is just set levels. Really, is just not really any EQing, because I just think that's just adding more stuff to keep you further from the finishing line. So like, if you can kind of, I think we were talking about this when we were chatting about mastering, about like in the old days, they would make everything sound really good before it even hit tape. And then when they would do a mix, they're mixing the recording, and there's a bit of EQ and there's a bit of, a bit of compression perhaps. But generally, you got a good drum sound, and then you recorded it, and then you've got it there and it's done. So there's sort of something about that from, the old fashioned times that I think is still quite valuable in terms of helping you getting to nearer the finishing line. Cause it's almost kind of like, I mean, these days with DAWs, you can pretty much always go back if you keep everything that you've used to get that bounce, that recording. But if you kind of trick yourself into saying that you can't, and you sort of go, well, I can't go back and redo that snare because I've done it, then it's sort of like, it's kind of I suppose it's a toss up between having a preference over doing all the work ahead of time or doing all the work after you've got the idea and the identity there of the piece. It's like, yeah, it's a bit of a juggling act. And I'm a little bit more into the pre-production, I think, at this point. If I can make something, if I can get a nice sound and the sound itself, it actually makes an impact on either how I perform it or how I'm going to get the idea in there. If it's done, then it's like, that's it. And I suppose that maybe comes from like being a guitarist, and early experiments with recording was like, I want my guitar to sound nice before I record it. I just put all the time into that. And then DAWs come along and it's like, oh, I can use Guitar Rig and change the guitar tone anytime I want. And then you get nothing done.
But
that's just my experience.
It would be interesting to hear like a summary of your process. Let's say you start with, you had a bit of a concept idea, and what do you do next? Because I'm thinking, like you were saying with the sound there, I know this is perhaps not very conventional, but I usually just put a little bit compression on and do a little bit of sound design during the process. I can't write the song without doing any of that, because then it doesn't excite me. It just needs to feel good, and then I just want to fix it maybe a little bit at the end, but I can't just like write the song first and then start designing the sounds for it. Like, do you have if you would summarize the steps you generally go through when you make a song, what would that be? You have the concept first, like the SH101 in this case. What happens next? Do you have like particular things that you do in a particular order to finish it?
It kind of depends on whether I'm doing something from scratch or whether I'm trying to realize an idea that I've had for a while. So in some cases, it might be that like I'm browsing a preset and I'll be like, or I'm trying to find something somewhere with something, and I'm like, oh, this sounds interesting. And then it leads you to either programming a sequence that sounds really interesting or playing something, with your hands that you get into, that you vibe off. And then it kind of goes from there. That's more sort of like if you're approaching something with a blank slate. If it's like an idea that I'm trying to realize, it's maybe like I need to put more time into finding the sound that I want before I even record the take or make the sequence or something. So yeah, and whether that's like when I was recording like my own drum kit, it took such a long time because I just wasn't happy with the snare sound. And I'm not a drummer anyway, so I can't really hit a snare and make it sound good. But then one day I was recording, did loads of recordings, and then I'd get them back and put them in a session, and I'd just be like, they just sound crap. I can't get into this, and like it's just not going to work. And then one day I was sort of like just playing on the drum kit, and I kind of did like that sort of classic rim shot where you hit the rim and the skin at the same time and get that real nice snappy jazz rim shot. And I was like, oh my God, I did it. I can do it. And then I just like sampled like loads and loads and loads of me doing that and overlaid them over the crap takes. And I was like, that's it. The drum sounds exactly how I want it. I'm good to go now. And then it all went, it's these small things that can happen that can really make an impact on everything else. And it's almost kind of like the fact that one thing sounds perfect for me, nothing else really matters. I don't care if the bass sounds shit because the snare sounds fucking awesome. So it's, it's these sort of like small things that...
You make a good point though around this, as like effectively a one-man band, for most of us are working in isolation. There's a creating sounds that you like phase, and then there's composing. It's very hard, well, I certainly find it hard to do both together. I think there's definitely something where you'll get a vibe off something. You got like a chord sequence or a little riff, or you like a sound of a break that you've chopped or something. But then if you have to go back and then say, like, to your point there, I don't like the sound of the snare, and I have to go and record a snare, that's it, you're 2 hours out of your zone to try and get to that sound by the time you've sorted that out. And at which point you probably lost the idea that you had in the first place. Yeah. So is this what I'm getting at? I think what may have not have happened in the past, where producers can pretty much do everything is just in a bedroom with a computer and maybe a couple of synths or whatever, not even that, but you still have to be able to organise your time in a way to make the composition and the sound creation are different things. Wait, I don't know. What would be interesting to hear what the group thinks about that.
Yeah.
I definitely find dividing things up into day sessions where you're doing the arranging and, making songs. I find that those are definitely so much more successful if I can just drag a sound in, right? I know that I've recorded all of these sounds. I love these drum sounds, so I'm just going to drag a snare in. And then night sessions where you're recording snares and making mud pies and making all the crazy sounds and often like organizing those things so that I'm able to go back and like just drag in. I like making 128s like in Ableton, just stack 128 kicks into a sampler, and then you can just select them with a knob. And now, I've got 128 different choices. The odds of not being able to find a kick and a snare in that, right? And so now I'm able to just drag these things in and just go and not think about, now I've got to go make a bass sound and find a bass sound that I like. Or it becomes just find a bass sound that I like. Because you can do the same thing with bass sounds, right? Make a 128 rack of bass sounds, and then you're just turning a knob to select between different sounds. And I think you're absolutely right on that separating those two out is one of the keys to being successful. Because if you're in the middle of, you're in the zone and you're in the middle of making a track, and then you have to go spend 2 hours recording a snare, and then you come back, where the hell was I? And you've got to get back into the zone and remember what you were doing. And so the less context switching you can do, I feel is the key.
Yeah, I think definitely, like, I would encourage everyone to document all their assets. So, like, if you're just spending an afternoon just messing about with a hi-hat preset or something, and you're just tweaking it or whatever, just record it. Just record it, slice them up, put them in a folder, and just keep them there somewhere. And like, yeah, I'm a big fan of that.
I have to say, I think I find it very easy just to spend time creating sound libraries and just do the sound design without any particular track in mind. But then when making a track, yes, I've got a huge library to pick from, and I might find things good enough, but I find it really difficult to just completely let go from. I just need to I don't necessarily need to spend 2 hours like making a snare drum, but I just need to get to something that just, I don't know, to vibe with. I can't quite let go.
So is it sort of like that you're kind of sort of trying to find something to get you inspired to take it further?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's it. And I also think that since I was a little kid, with music, it was somehow like the sounds, and especially with electronic music, like it was the sounds like more than the melody sometimes that just like drew me in. So yeah. And I think, that's what sort of makes me inspired, like somehow. It's probably counterproductive when it comes to finishing stuff, but
yeah. So so a good vibe is something to, whether it's like a little groove or a sequence or something that's sort of like, this is exciting. I want to take this somewhere.
It's got to be one element, right? In something, even if it's everything that's around it's shit. There's got to be one thing that you've said, I like that. It can't be like a layers of just things that I don't like, or you can definitely have things where I don't like the rest of it apart from a bass sound, but because it's trying to get out of the way of yourself as well. Like maybe the track becomes then just that bit that you like, and that's enough. You don't have to have 100 layers to try and turn that one thing you like into the one thing that's got 99 other things that you don't like on top of it. It's a clusterfuck, the whole process, and just getting out your own way. Just like that, when you're happy with something, like it's so hard. It's just...
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I find myself actually being more obsessed with stupid details than I am about the actual whole piece of music. So I might be like really obsessing over like the way that something makes an initial impact, or the way that there's like a movement from one section to the next section, or again, just like the snare drum, it's like you know, the music might be nice, but it just feels flat. Like what is it missing to give it that extra like lift and that punch and you know, those are the sort of physicality of it sometimes is something that I'm like, yeah, the idea is good, but it just feels naff. It's just not punchy.
What's your little tick? Because I know I can recognize that very well when I do stuff. Like, it doesn't necessarily sound wrong, but it's just like boring as. Like, what do you do to unlock that?
I don't know if I've got like a approach or technique or something, but I will just sort of obsess over it for a long time, and I guess I'll just sort of, yeah, I don't know. I can't really think of any examples. Like, so I'm. Oh, sorry. You're gonna.
Well, I would say one of the things I like to do is like take a riff or whatever and then resample that, but start throwing effects at it, start twisting knobs, start, you know, and record yourself really just kind of screwing up that sound, and then you can take that and, you know, either repeat the process. Or start doing kind of, you know, these micro edits and checkerboarding some of those kind of fucked up sounds into your original sound to just give it kind of that, you know, pop, right?
Yeah, I was.
Oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just wanted to add to this that in most cases when I get to mix something and or sort of be the one who participates in the production, I kind of feel a lot of the boring stuff comes from track being a bit too dry in terms of effects. So I completely agree with John that throwing some effects on is one thing to kind of liven it up because it gives sort of a dimension to everything. And another thing that I personally really like is to modulate things. Like, modulation is probably the kind of the biggest tool you could throw at it, which is like a really simple, if you get like a Eurorec or if you produce an Ableton, like use LFOs which modulate LFO, and it sort of creates this sort of motion in all parts you're doing. For me, it works really well, I would say.
Yeah, the thing that I was going to get at was when I did the so I suppose this is to do with sort of ambient textures or stuff that's a little bit further back in the mix. When I did the album that was the drum kit and bass guitar and all that sort of stuff, my intention was that I wanted to have a lot of like feedback sounds on there, like a lot of sort of Kevin Shields, My Bloody Valentine, sort of like shoegazy feedback stuff, and I tried it with the guitar because I was thinking, I'm a guitarist, I can do this, and like I was, you know, doing all kinds of stupid dancing around amplifiers and speakers and trying to get these like piercing screaming harmonics, and it was just like, oh, it's just awful. Like, this is, and I would get like, I would lose all my enthusiasm like straight away and just kind of go, I'm done, I'm not going to bother. And then like and then I sort of stumbled on this thing of like, oh, if I get like 2 sine waves and like put one sine wave at a different pitch on one side of the mod wheel and then get another one at a different pitch on the other side of the mod wheel and put some guitar distortion on it, like that overtone that happens as I crossfade from one sine wave to the other sounds exactly like that feedback thing that I'm trying to get out of the guitar. It's that sort of, it's that transition from one harmonic to the other. And then you add a bit of reverb or whatever. And I was just like, well, that's it. That's the sound. It's not a guitar, but that's the sound I want. And then I was able to get everything exactly how I wanted it through this really minimalist performance of just holding notes and sliding between these 2 sine waves. And that just completely changed everything. It was just like, well, that's it. That's that. Now that I've got that, nothing else matters. Again, it's that sort of thing of like, you can sort of obsess over these one things, these details, but once you nail it, it's enough to really drive you to get closer to the finishing line.
I believe it took My Bloody Valentine a couple of years when they notoriously for locked in a studio for 2 years and almost bankrupting the company or something. Was it? When did they get released? And was it Creation Records or something? And that Loveless album, which became their epic release of the early 90s, I think it was to the point that he must have laboured over that stuff so much to get to where that album got to, which is brilliant. But like I say, he probably You could have helped him out there to say, yeah, just get a couple of.
I think he
couple of
sampled
sine waves, dude.
he would sample a lot of his feedback, wouldn't he? I think on some of those records. Was he into that stuff?
And he did a lot of solid a lot of it was the guitars and effects pedals, but I think just trying to capture what they were doing live. I mean, it was interesting because he definitely had a vision for what he was trying to do, and that at that particular time, no one had really nailed that in the way they did it. They were definitely the pioneers of that particular sound.
Yeah.
To compound the challenge we're talking about today, we have not only have we got to finish tracks, which in itself is, as we've already discussed, is challenging. A few of us now have recognised, and me later to the party than others, that the importance of visuals. So not only have we got to produce tracks, we have to create some visuals that bring out the best of the tune as well. So, and I know, Ned, you've just released your new EP, and there's some fantastic visual on the lead track for that. I wonder if you could sort of talk us through some of that and some of the challenges of having to build visuals and music, really.
Yes, Alan, I can. Let's get this ready. Hang on a minute. I need to get my screen real estate sorted. Where's it? Can you see the floating window?
Yeah.
So, okay, yeah. So basically, I made a max patch and then I put it into Ableton so that I could kind of automate it and kind of like sort of not really animate it. Like it kind of just takes care of itself. I didn't really do too much work on this. This was about 4 hours I did on Wednesday or something. Let's see if it's gonna do it. Gonna do it.
It's hiding behind our windows, so I can see our faces. Oh, there we are.
It looks better on here than it does on YouTube.
That does look great. It makes me think of like Tron or something.
It's got So I think it's rendering at 24 frames a second. I put a ridiculous amount of bloom on it, so it's got like a bit of a manga thing about it, I suppose, or like an old anime thing. Just turn it down a little bit. So really, all I'm doing is just like there's just some automation. Really of just this device I made. So this is all just like little squiggles of automation I did. But I kind of like, what I really wanted to do actually was, so look, it's kind of paused on that piece of automation now. So there's doing a shaky cam. But like, I really wanted to do this. For some reason, I was just thinking of the intro to Superman the movie, the way that the text kind of just goes like that into the camera. Does anyone remember that? The opening credits?
Indeed, yeah.
The opening credits of Superman the movie, like the kind of text like flies in and then sort of like elongates on the Z-axis perspective, like into the camera. And I kind of wanted to do something that sort of came to the camera, and then I sort of got this. But like really what's happening here is that that's just a load of noise. So maybe let's see if I can open up Max. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Can you see Max right now? Let's see if we can sort of talk through this. So essentially what this is jit.gl.isosurf, which is an object I've never ever used because I've never understood it. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm sending like some noise, like a noise function from this object here. So that's just like a matrix of just cell noise. These are all just like values of 0 to 1 or something. And then I wonder if I could like move. Maybe I could like move around. We could have a look inside. Let's see what's going on here. Wait, is it going to let me do that? No. Okay, maybe I need to delete the camera.
I love the color palette you've got there, though.
Oh yeah, there we go. So that's, if I sort of zoom out a little bit, that's actually what we're looking at. Is that that's just a load of noise scrolling through this isosurf thing. So we can actually sort of look at it from another direction here like that. So, and then I just put the camera like right inside, so it's got this sort of like tunnel vibe. But yeah, the color palette, I went through that sort of like classic kind of, that sort of dusky color palette that you see a lot of, like orange and blue, like they're kind of on the spectrum, as it were. They're kind of contrasting colors. I wonder if there's a way that I can. Let me just think for a second where I can. Yeah, so if I go to this light here and open up the color wheel for the diffuse or something. So you've got like orange here and you've got blue down here. So they're kind of essentially opposite ends of the spectrum. So they kind of go quite well together. And then there's just a huge amount of bloom on the final render. So actually, there's a sub rendering context happening here with this jit.gl node. So that's actually looking at the 3D scene and then giving me that as a texture. So actually, if I make a P window here, we should be able to actually see the same thing. Yeah. But if we look at that, there's no post-processing. Oh my goodness me. There's no post-processing on that. So that's actually what the 3D scene looks like without the post-processing on. And so the post-processing is this blur. That's a depth of field for the camera, and then there's this bloom, and then I did a little bit of more blur. I didn't really know what I was doing. It's just a lot of blurring, just to make it look really sort of bloomy like that, you know.
It definitely looks way better with all the bloom.
It really makes a difference
without it.
Yeah, I just once I sort of learned how to do the post processing on a rendering with this jit.gl.parse. And also you can chain them together and come up with these nice chains of effects and stuff, and then kind of apply it to like the whole render, as it were. And then there's a little bit of feedback here. So
yeah, why do you have JIT.gl pics feeding JIT.gl pics?
Yeah, so that's just to make a little bit of video feedback, just to make it bloom out even more, really.
Gotcha. Okay.
So what else do we have here? Oh, so this jit.catch, that's actually listening to the audio and adding these like squares over it. So that I'm just sort of glitching the camera, I suppose, glitching a layer of like what's like kind of, the camera's looking at the 3D scene, but then if you imagine the kind of camera lens is being glitched, as it were, by the audio. And then that's pretty much it. So yeah, it's all about this gl.isosurf thing, which like we can kind of look at the help file and see that it sort of just creates things like this. Just sort of, you can just take like noise data, matrix data, and sort of make these bizarre sort of things like this.
That's fucking cool.
Is this even working? Oh yeah, you sort of get this sort of thing. And then essentially what I was doing was just moving through one axis like that. Yeah. So that they sort of scroll past. So actually nothing's moving. It's actually just sort of being constant. The Z axis is being sort of persistently offset. And then I just added a little bit of, I'm getting a little bit. Somewhere there's like a camera. Oh no, I didn't do shaky camera. I just moved, I added like this Perlin noise thing here to kind of make the position of it like jitter, so that it kind of gets intense and wiggles around and stuff at certain points. And yeah, and then I just made a decision over like what kind of parameters I want to control. And then I just put it into Max for Live and just tweaked around with some parameters, really. Just sort of.
So you're specifically controlling the automation based on where you want the dynamics to sort of particularly jump out. You've gone through specifically and done that. It's not reacting to just the audio track.
It's more kind of like I've just put things in there that might complement what's happening in the audio. I mean, there are things happening that are reacting to the audio. So these like little squares that are appearing now, that stuff.
Yeah.
It's very subtle, but like.
That's great, man. It's really effective.
So yeah, that's that. So basically, you can absolutely do 3D animations in Ableton. It's totally possible, and I recommend everyone do it because it's fun. And it's
you've been trying to persuade me to get. I finally weakened after you've been going on about it for about last month, and I've finally got Max MSP as well. And actually, after you gave me a bit of tutorial this week, I spent all afternoon today fiddling around with this. It's fantastic.
Sorry,
Can
go
you
on.
bounce the video directly from Ableton, or did you like do a screen record?
I actually did a screen record with ScreenFlow, but I could have used on Mac. You can use Siphon, and you can use a. There's like an external object you can get for Macs that will allow you to pipe a texture into Siphon, and then you can send the texture to and from around other programs. And there's Spout for PC as well. And so then what you can do is that you can use Siphon Recorder to basically capture whatever any texture it's receiving. And indeed, it will capture audio as well. But on this occasion, I just did a screen capture because this is a 4K monitor and I've just upgraded my ScreenFlow. So it's still quite difficult. It still doesn't really look good. So afterwards, I was sort of like, it doesn't look as good as I would like. So I'll make it look a little bit worse to kind of mask the fact that it doesn't sound. So I put like a vintage filter on it to kind of make it look a little bit like like an Instagram photo or whatever, because I was like, but the thing is, it's also fast anyway. It doesn't really matter. And it was meant to be kind of a bit of a psychedelic roller coaster type thing. But it is still quite tricky to get this stuff out of Macs. And so in most cases, like a dedicated program like Blender is always going to do better. Hi, Damien.
Hello.
What's the backdrop today?
Yeah, where are you today?
Artificial Stonehenge.
Fair enough. Where's your drum bus, man?
I don't know. This is like a different Zoom account, I guess. I couldn't
So
find
you
the
get
drum
to
bus
between
today.
drum bus or like future Stonehenge. That's your options.
Oh, I got a lot of. Who's the guy that does the paintings for Yes? His name's escaping me right now. Roger Dean. I got a lot of Roger Dean art too. Make a lot of this AI art stuff from is I mix together a lot of Roger Dean art with like pictures of snakes or like a mosque.
There's something going on in that archway that looks like a face, and it's kind of freaking me out. It's giving me like a bit of a pareidolia kind of fit.
I try and make all the AI stuff somewhat creepy.
Yeah. And so we're just chatting about finishing tracks.
Very nice. New EP is sounding awesome. I really like that. The video you made for it.
Thanks, man. I actually
That's
as
what
it
you
happens-
missed.
Yeah, well, yeah, you just missed that bit. But like, I went to a Music Hackspace Max meetup today, and a couple of the guys who now work at Cycling 74, who have been working on some of the new stuff that's coming in Jitter, is really fucking awesome. Like, there's some really, there's great stuff in the newest version of Max 8.3, but they're adding some new stuff later on, and it's mind blowing. For some other programs like Unreal and Blender, it's all bread and butter, but for Max, it's like a huge development because, Max is all about real time and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
But yeah, anyway.
The theme of the session is, Damien, and thanks for turning up 2 hours late, but we'll roll with it, right?
Called out. Goddamn.
It's all right. It's a pub. It's a pubcast.
It's a
Come and leave as you
podcast.
wish.
We can say that. We can be mean to each other now. So is like what the challenges of like finishing tracks and just the general your internal battle of getting things done, and the bit you've come in on here is we're sort of taking that the expectation now to have some kind of visual component on
Yeah.
So not only have you got to make your tracks and they've got to be good, and you've got to be able to release them with some kind of cadence so people don't completely forget about you, you've also got to have some cool videos. So it's like some of a
See,
challenge.
that's been the easiest part for me because before I even started playing music, I was doing like collage art and stuff like that. So usually when it comes to making tracks and whatnot, I'll often make a really cool video or like a really cool picture like this. And that sort of inspires me to make music based off of that. I actually used this thing that's behind me right now for a release I put out called Through the Magic Window, which originally was 15-minute live set for a internet radio show based out of Scotland called The Magic Window. And I made this and I figured, let me the sort of in the Stonehenge was sort of like the magic window I was talking about. And that's what inspired the whole thing. And I started making stuff up from the visual component. So that's always been the easiest aspect for me. And anyone that sees my Instagram or YouTube and whatnot, it's very visually intense. And I usually end up making that stuff beforehand. And I've got a big folder of it. And then I kind of like, what sort of music would go to it?
So is it kind of like it's sort of part of the whole process?
Yeah.
In some ways. So I suppose we're all I suppose the thing that we're getting at is that like, that maybe there's going to be something along the way where you're going to have to bring in some sort of visual interpretation of it. I mean, like I definitely want to go in that direction eventually with Max. Like I want to really be doing compositions where the sound and the visuals are all integrated and all working together, and it's all one and the same, and that it's all like one compositional process rather than sort of making a piece of music and then making a video. It's like doing them all at the same time. And now that I've finished these 3 tracks, that's absolutely something I'm going to get into for the rest of this year, is sort of trying to do like proper audio visual composition. Really, that's really what I want to get into. And Max is.
I had the idea for sort of like a color organ, I think is the best way to put it. Something where that, I don't know, you could make something visually and it would react with audio components. So I think this is something that Max would lean to, that it would take your screen and based on, there's a bunch of blue pixels over here, that starts playing this synth in F. And the more red you get, the more G notes it starts adding. Because I think a lot of visual artists could make great music if there was some way for their visual art to make sound. Or like a dancer, for instance, like some sort of interpretive dancer could dance in front of a camera and based on how they're moving their body, could make sounds. I feel like you had someone on More Kicks Than Friends, or maybe it was one of your music hack-based stuff that was sort of like moving.
Yeah, I'm thinking of
based off of that.
I'm thinking of Ross Flight. Yeah, he's got his Xbox Kinect controlled granular synth sampler thing that I remember he said he can pick up samples and load them into the sampler with his hands. And sort of scroll around. Did you not see that? He was on.
No.
I'll dig it out and send it to you. He was on More Kicks and Friends, and then he did it again for Music Hackspace. And
it's really cool.
On this time, he talked about it. But yeah, so he made this. He made this Max patch where with an Xbox Kinect, he can kind of load a sound into a sampler and then sort of scroll around it. I think he sort of has this like pool of sounds, and then he's kind of like jumping to certain positions and certain samples at certain places with his like hands and stuff. But because he's quite into dancing, it's sort of there's that layer to it as well. So he's kind of like dancing with the sound, I suppose. So
it's interesting
it's
you mentioned
awesome.
you talk about the composing from the audio visual perspective. Just looking at that color wheel, and the thing you said earlier on when you were showing your patch was you're looking for as much contrast between the colors in your selection. It's almost like the circle of fifths, the music circle of fifths. You can almost superimpose that over the top of the color wheel.
Yeah.
If you go from the extreme on the circle of fifths, you're going to get as far away as you can get from C to say G flat, for example. Is that not the same thing? So there's a nice crossover there.
You might be onto something there, I suppose. In terms of, I suppose you could just sort of line them up and see what happens. But yeah, I mean, there are obviously, I don't know a huge amount about these things. I'm no graphic designer and I'm no sort of visual artist, really. I'm more of a visual experimentalist. You pick up these things along the way, and obviously, like there are complementary colors and there are colors that are opposite ends of the spectrum or whatever. Or there are certain colors you get when you add a certain amount of numbers together. So if you do 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, then I think you get gray. I think, or 0. Or something. So there are all these kind of like because you're working in Max and it's all just numbers at the end of the day. It's really about how you extrapolate the data and how you interpret, how you sort of make it integrate with another bit of extrapolated data, and like in some ways, like geometry works quite well. So when you kind of work in like geometry and sort of thinking of like, 0 being the center, 1 being over here, and -1 being all the way over here, that's not a million miles away from when you look at an audio file. You look at an audio file, and the sound generally goes from 0 to 1, and then down through 0 to -1, and that's So
that brings up the idea of like the data's data, right? The context is what we're talking about. Like just loading a Word document into Photoshop, or taking a Photoshop file and playing sound with that. There's lots of people have experimented with it in the past. The data, the structure of the data is exactly the same, but the context is different. So, and I guess you'll kind of find there's something that probably could be explored a bit more. Certainly, having something like Max, where you could potentially put a bit more structure around how you investigate that.
There are some things that I've tried where I've there are some objects. Did I do a video about this, or maybe I posted an Instagram about it? Where there's an object called jit.peak, and in Max you have like these peek and poke objects, and one is for like writing data to a buffer, and the other one is reading the data from the buffer. And some of them have kind of a sort of cross-compatible between the two environments of jitter and audio. So like jit.peak or jit.poke, or one of them, I can't remember, is one of those things. And basically what that will do is if it's referencing a matrix, which could be anything, an image, could be an image or a video or even your webcam, it basically reads through the image data on a certain axis, and basically just converts it to a sound depending on how fast you read through it. So if you read through it at an audio rate, you get a sound.
Sure. And
so like you can do these kinds of things where, I can have my webcam up, and depending on like how I'm filling the data, the table of data is going to make an impact on the timbre of the sound. So, if I kind of go all white with my hand, if I kind of like, or black it out or whatever, it's going to make an impact. And that's sort of the stuff that I think I would maybe quite like to get into is like, rather than thinking of like sonification or kind of like audio reactive video, maybe it could go the other way and make video reactive audio. So
I just want to, sorry to interrupt, but you made your camera out of focus while
I'm so sorry.
The concepts are just so abstract.
Yeah, the more arty you're getting, Ned, the more blurred you get becoming.
Yeah.
How do I get it back into focus? Oh, bloody hell. I got auto. Oh, it's done. There we go. Okay. All right. Sorry. What was happening? What were we saying?
I think to make like what is it, video reactive audio, it would take a bit of work, because Alan mentioned earlier sort of putting the circle or the color wheel over the circle of fifths. And while that kind of works in concept, if you look at a lot of art, it uses a lot of different colors throughout the color wheel. Even if a lot of it is maybe one color or a few, there's the contrast on the other side, and that might work with a circle of fifths, but you're going to get a lot of dissonance if you did it just color to note directly. I think it would take a lot of tweaking, and then you would probably have to keep it within a certain scale or a certain color gradients for a scale or something like that. I don't think it would be just as simple as taking a color wheel and transposing it to the circle of fifths. I think you'd have to be very selective, either about what kind of notes you're going to use or what kind of colors you're going to use. Maybe something like, was it Giant Steps that kind of goes through all of it? Might be kind of cool, but I think at the end of the day, you end up getting, with most songs, you end up getting a lot of brown as everything moved together. It would all just become black or brown.
Think about it,
very selective.
I think the way to look at it, for each individual context, if you're writing a story or a poem or something, subtle balance you're playing with tensions and release, building up tension, releasing it. The same is true of music, and the same is true with visual arts. So there's like a kind of a broader concept here. But how I agree with you, like how you'd bring that together into a single piece, so you can think from that perspective. So you're playing with that. What's a chord sequence? But taking something up and resolving it back, you can take it off and you can create more dissonance and more tension. But ultimately, you bring it back to something. And And I think
Yeah.
the same is true with all these different approaches for any kind of art. But how do we avoid just creating that massive slab of brown, as you say there, that doesn't mean anything? So maintaining that context that everybody understands, that narrative, and then taking that through to something that is truly multimedia or multi-channeled or multi-context. I don't know what the right term for that would be, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, shit's getting heavy, man. We might need to dial this back to the usual kind.
Well, I mean, I think we've sort of gone off on a tangent a little bit, but it's a good one. I suppose one thing that I would, again, to sort of bring that point about like, essentially when you're working in Macs or indeed digital environments, it's all just numbers really at the end of the day. And some of these things have like different numbers so, what I was getting at with the sort of geometry thing is that often when I'm doing stuff like in Gen to kind of make geometric shapes, I'm often thinking about things within the confines of -1 to 1 or 0 to 1, which is very much also what I'm thinking when I'm thinking about doing like DSP signal maths or whatever. If I've got a sine wave and I want to clip it or do something with it or whatever and all this sort of stuff. And you'll find that like a lot of the things kind of start to merge when you do like stuff in Gen to do like geometry. If you just create a matrix that's just got a single row of data that's everything is one, and then you just kind of get like a straight line. If you apply like a cosine function to that, then you get a wavy line. If you kind of multiply that, then it gets bigger. If you fold that, then when it reaches its peak, it folds back in. That's exactly the same way that distortion works with audio. That's how you get fold back distortion. So when you think about these, and obviously clipping and all this type of stuff, when you start to think about these things, I start to see these similarities, and that's kind of where I'm starting to think about exploring these things of like, rather than getting the visuals to react to the audio, maybe I can actually shape the audio based around the geometry that I'm drawing. And then use mathematics to manipulate the geometry and therefore shapes the timbre of the sound. That's kind of like, I'm sort of going the opposite direction of what because most of the time we all just kind of think, oh yeah, I really want audio reactive visuals. They look so cool. And they do, but like actually when you get into it, there's all these sort of like variables and different ways that you can get things to connect and stuff. And like, I mean, Gus, like we were talking about this and you went down the MIDI route. So you're triggering all these visuals like purely from MIDI. And like, I think that actually probably makes more impact because the timing is going to be better. The thing is, when you do audio reactive visuals, is that visuals happen at 30 to 60 frames a second by today's standards. Whereas audio happens at 48,000 times a second. It's so much faster. And, if you kind of get really into it, you can actually, you really need to dial it back a little bit, because what you end up creating, not you personally, but when one does it, like you end up getting like something that's happening that is reacting to the audio, but it's happening so fast that you can't see anything. So to actually think about it more with MIDI in terms of like, I'm going to use MIDI to execute a thing that happens now that's timed with the music. I think that that's actually a slightly more solid approach.
Well, and it's actually a really interesting way to work, similar to like what Des was saying. So I'm sending MIDI from the Octatrack into Max, but all of my sounds and everything are either in the Octatrack or the 301. But what's really interesting is I actually have been starting with the visuals. So I'll get the visuals doing something interesting and then try to match them with any particular sound. As you continue going on with the process, it'll bounce back and forth. Sometimes I'll be being driven by what the screen is doing, and then other times I'll try to make the screen do something based on whatever audio thing might be happening there. And it just leads to some really interesting stuff. And especially with the more glitchy style I'm doing, that definitely makes it easier, because it's just abstract shapes moving with abstract sounds. But it's definitely really interesting. hard, but interesting for sure. You know, just trying to keep my head.
What was that?
Awesome.
Who was that?
I have
Who did
no
that?
idea.
What happened?
There was some music.
Was that?
There was a
That-
glitchy few seconds.
Was it this?
Yes.
I couldn't hear it myself. Yes, it was me, but I couldn't hear it myself. I'm sorry.
Thought it was like the Phantom Menace. Phantom of the Zoom call. The Phantom Glitch artist. Yeah. So, well, where do we go from here?
Yeah, it has gone a bit tangential. What was the subject again?
Finishing a track.
Finishing tracks.
Yes.
Okay, so shall everyone give just one tip or something? Like, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, my one tip would be speed. I forget who said this, but they said they've got a 20-hour timeline. They called it a 20-hour guillotine. If you've got 20 hours to finish that track, not consecutively, but however many sessions it takes, you've got 20 hours to get that one thing to completion, or maybe after that 20 hours, you're doing like your final mix or the master if you do that yourself. But the longer you spend on something, the more you overthink it. Some of the best tracks are done in like 4 hours. The quicker you go, the quicker you get those ideas on paper, the less you tend to overthink it. And if you like something initially, you're going to like it later. But if you sit there and listen to it over and over and over again, you're not going to like it anymore. You got to work really fast. And maybe that's not the way for everyone, but I found that is really helpful for me. I've been making some tracks with other people recently, and it's come together really quick because both of us work really fast. We can decide that's a good 303 line. That's a good drum pattern. Let's play that for 5 minutes. All right, cool. We like these bits. Put that out. All right, let's go do some quick arrangement. Done. Whole track is done within less than 4 hours. And then we move on to the next one. And you're able to knock stuff out really quickly. And you listen back to it and you really like it. There's some little tweaks you might want to do later. So you want to leave don't want to print everything immediately as you go. But I've had a lot of songs I've ended up scrapping, and there were probably good ideas to start, but I took too long and I can't stand them anymore. And then you go back to it maybe after a couple of months, you're like, oh, wow, this was really good. I just got bogged down in listening to the same 8 to 16 bar loop over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah. So speed. And I suppose like with that, it kind of stays fresh.
Yeah.
You it's almost like you sort of want to ride the freshness of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, if you come to the end of that ride and it's not done, that's when it can start to get a bit tricky, I think.
It's always been the case though with multiple takes in the studio. If someone's playing, say, a guitar solo or doing a vocal line, you want to capture, and what tends to happen, people will piece together the best of, but usually the first few things are the best ones. They've got the most energy in them. And even though they're not perfect, they've got the vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a rawness, perhaps. I was thinking, I know that we were talking about this the other day, Alan, but like it's just come into my mind that like there's like a sort of there's kind of like a thing where maybe we put too much expectations on ourselves, and maybe we don't really need to, and everything that we've already done is perfectly fine. You know, there's like a huge amount of music that people have made, the artists I like, and I think it's absolutely perfect as it is. But there's no way that I know what they're thinking. You know, they might be listening back to it and thinking, I wish I could have done more with that. I wish I'd done this. I wish, oh God, I hate that or whatever. And like, by that point, it's not really their decision anymore. It's our decision as the listener to decide whether it's good or not, and if we like it for what it is. And, you know, I was talking about that thing about how you ascribe authenticity to things. You can't inscribe it. Like, you know, it's up to the consumer. If your goal ultimately is to make a piece of art and share it with people, you know, once you've done that point, you can't really do anything about it anymore. It's up to the people who consume it to decide its value.
Your opinion of your own work, I'm sorry to cut you off. Your opinion of your own work is largely irrelevant. You should have some sort of quality control, but you're not making it for you at the end of the day. You're making it for other people to listen to, usually. At least for me, some of the tracks I put out that I like the least are the most popular, or the ones that people like the best. because your opinion is largely irrelevant. You're probably not going to be the person listening to your music the most.
No. Yeah. So it's I guess it's that kind of that thing of like, maybe just give yourself a break and, remember that like when you do make music by yourself, you are kind of doing what would have been 5 people's jobs 40 years ago, like you're doing, and we're not even touching on the marketing and the branding and the artwork and all that sort of stuff, So, we live in this sort of era of auteurism, auteurship, the auteur,
What?
Authorship. Or are you not familiar with authorship?
I've never heard of that.
Sure.
Quick, someone look it up.
Is that a euphemism?
I'd say Tarantino is an auteur. I can't remember how to spell it. Auteur, Auteur.
I'm American. My English isn't that good.
It's more related to film theory. An auteur is an artist with a distinctive approach, usually a film director whose filmmaking control is so unbound but personal that the director is likened to the author of the film, which thus manifests the director's unique style or thematic focus. Yeah. So, I think in the context of film, you would maybe, I would think of someone like Tarantino or Hitchcock or something like that. Perhaps even James Cameron, like they're not just the director, they're doing all this other stuff. They've written this, world builders. George Lucas was an author. So, and like, and I think a lot of producers these days are sort of in a similar vein where, you're not just a musician who came out and played the drums for 4 hours and got paid. Everything that you do is your thing. You're responsible for everything, and not for everyone, but for a lot of us, we're responsible for everything. We write the music, we write the theme tune, sing the theme tune. We, we do the artwork, we do the marketing, we do the branding, we do our web design, we deal with transactions, deal with customers, deal with feedback, market research, all this sort of stuff.
We hopefully don't master it ourselves, though.
Get a mastering engineer.
Yeah.
But I suppose actually it's more, rather than auteurship, perhaps it's more entrepreneurship. Perhaps like in the digital age, to be an artist is actually to be an entrepreneur, I suppose, which I think is maybe an idea that other people have as well. But yeah. Where were we before we got there? Before I got onto auteurship?
That sounded pretty impressive. I don't know what to say after that. That was knocked out.
Just chuck a bit of film theory in there.
Yeah.
Film theory.
I was just going to say you need
to
a
finish your
deadline.
tracks.
Yeah, a deadline. Oh yeah, so we were thinking about tips, weren't we? Like, what's a good tip? Speed, deadlines. I mean, I don't want to sound sort of cynical, but like, just having an emotional detachment from things.
Yes.
Like I was saying earlier, like, almost kind of getting to the point where you kind of hate it and you don't want it in your life anymore, and that you're ready to move on, and then that protects you from criticism.
Well, Alex, who's not on the call tonight, Human Synthetics, he says this a bit like, your self-worth is wrapped up in every track you produce. And he said you have to separate yourself from there. You're making tunes.
I also wanted to suggest sort of setting goals for yourself other than sort of related to music you produce. For example, you can limit yourself with the setup or whatever you can record, like using 2 hands simultaneously, and just go with it. So any kind of limitations I feel very useful for you to kind of treat and disconnect yourself from sort of quality, which cannot be really measured in a way.
Yeah, limitation. Oh, sorry.
No, I was agreeing. Limitations really help, because you can, especially with something like Ableton, you've got you can go up to like 128 plus tracks. You've got all those different instruments, all your different samples, all those different effects. You can really get lost and sort of lose the point. If you limit yourself to just a few things, especially just to start off with, and go fast, you're probably going to get a lot more results than endlessly dicking around through presets or your plugin folder or your sample folder.
I agree, but at the same time, I'm in a position where I actually don't want to do that. So, because I think most of the time, that's kind of what I've done, either by accident or on purpose. Like with the SH-101, it's kind of like, if I'm going to write these tracks, all the music is going to be done by just the SH-101 in multiple takes. And whilst that was, in my mind conceptually was like, that's an interesting idea. This could be quite interesting, quite rewarding. It was a pain at the same time. I'm almost kind of like, so many times I've kind of put these sort of, creative limitations on myself that I'm actually sort of thinking like I'd like a bit of a holiday from that and actually approach something where it's kind of like, I've got everything. I've got more than everything. I've got eternity in my computer. Like, I'm just going to use everything and just see if it makes a difference and see if that affects the process, especially with regards to finishing things. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
Isn't that getting into the generative side, sort of crossover as well? Like you've got the machine. Actually, forget it. I'm going down a rabbit hole here. Sort of something. You can almost go to a point where you just get someone else to create some music for you, and you just tell them when it's good, and then that's your output. And
I have a side project where I do exactly that. I try and treat my computer as a second bandmate. I give them a certain amount of creativity to come up with riffs or ideas, and I take those ones that I like, and we'll make a more of a composition out of that. Because I think Ned has maybe said this before. You could just flick everything on random and record it for 4 minutes. You might get something that's good, but that's probably not going to happen. You probably want to use that random to get some good ideas. Use it like another band member, like your second guitarist who comes up with some riffs, and you're like, yes, I really like that 8 bars. Let's use that. I will write something to complement that, and then maybe we'll have the computer generate up some more riffs, and then that'll be the B section.
Yeah. You've still got to pick what's good, right? That's always the thing. Wasn't that the Brian Eno thing? It's like, you got all this generative stuff going on, but someone's got to at some point say that had some artistic worth.
Yep. I agree.
This is what Phil talks about in his Post-it note video, is that like, it's one thing to sort of say that like there's all this technology just spitting out all this random stuff, but it still takes a human being to decide what's good or not, and to ascribe identity to it in order to develop it into something that has meaning.
I also think that, like, if you have your computer doing something for you, it actually frees up time for you to do stuff that you wouldn't have been able to do. I don't mean sort of clean your house, but actually doing something on the music that you don't have to focus on the things, doing them manually. Like if you just get the computer to do some stuff, that gives you more time and focus on, whatever else you need to tweak. Maybe it's building the tools that generates the random stuff, or, it's not for you just to sit back and say yes or no, I think.
Yeah, I wonder if people have like this sort of idea that like us computer musicians are all sort of sitting there going, no, do it again.
Yeah.
Okay, that one. Okay, job done. It's not sort of like that, really. It's kind of like it's a tool. There are just these little tools that just sort of help out along the way. They just like, I just think of it as like someone there going, "What about this? Why don't you try that?" Yeah, all right, that's good. Yeah, we'll use that. Or something. Or it's not a fully automated process. It's more an assisted process, I suppose.
But playing around with a sequencer, for example, most of my musical background was in playing in bands. And a lot of people sort of lying around with hangovers, just playing on their various instruments. And then someone will go, "What was that?" And they're like, what? And they're not even aware of it, but someone else will pick up on something. Usually, it's not always you. Occasionally, you're going to come up with a riff you like. But other people are coming in and saying, "That's great." And it's like, it's the same. You're just watching something unfold and you're picking something out of that. And half the stuff in my old band was done that way. It's basically people just playing around. Some of it's rich, jamming together. It's so much chance involved, but someone has to say that's good.
Yeah. That was actually going to be my tip: was stop worrying about writing tracks so much. Especially like if you don't owe them to anybody, just stop worrying about it and just keep experimenting and exploring and recording. And tracks will just kind of happen. At least in our world, I think it will, especially if you are always kind of recording things here and there and just kind of keeping on your toes. I think it helps to actually not worry at all about whether you're writing tracks or not. It'll just kind of, for some, it'll just kind of happen over time. You end up with, 8 or 10 things that you recorded over the past couple months, and it's like, that would all work together as an album, actually.
Yeah. John, what would be your tip?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The just finishing things, getting to the end. One of the things that I like to do is set a timer, right? Come up with a list of steps, do whatever, 6 steps, right? Like chop samples, create drums, create a bass line, create some chords, arrange, and then finish, right? There's 6 steps, right? And time yourself, do 5 minutes on each or do 10 minutes on each, and then now you've spent 30 minutes, you've finished a track. Maybe it's not necessarily a masterpiece, but if you spend 30 minutes a day finishing a track, you'll learn a lot, and you'll start to develop those habits of finishing things, because practice makes habits. So just practicing finishing tracks is a great way to learn how to finish tracks. And I agree with the not caring so much, like separating yourself from the music, because I said it earlier, some of the best tracks are the ones that are done quickly, and some of the worst tracks are I've spent months and months and months belaboring this thing, and you get to a point where you're spending hours and not making any changes, right? Like this law of diminishing returns. So get it done and get it out there.
I'd quite like to sort of call back to that thing I was saying earlier about bouncing as you go, which sort of psychologically gets you close to the finishing line. I also want to kind of add that like it's almost sort of like psychologically rewarding yourself as well. Like rewarding yourself for your work by seeing a printed piece of audio in your session is kind of, for me, I kind of quite like that. Is I can look at it and I go, yeah, I did that. That's done. And then, you make your way through the stages and then it's finished, So yeah, I think reward yourself as you go as well. And sort of give yourself pats on the back occasionally, like, and printing. That's what's nice about bouncing and printing as you go, I think. Yeah. What about you, Nick? You got a tip? You got a tip for finishing?
Yeah, as I said, like limiting yourself and setting some goals which are unrelated to quality, something you can actually like describe, like a to-do list or whatever. Like, for example, I was paralyzed with Ableton when I was trying to produce tracks there. So I decided like I have to limit my toolbox, and whatever I can do with just playing through, I don't know, like 5 minutes is a track, and I'm going to release it. So however shit it is. And I think a lot of people just undervalue the kind of how great something with broad strokes can be, and they all obsess over details which elude a lot of listeners. So to me, it's that.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I guess we could maybe use that as a good time to wrap up. Although I'm not sure how to finish.
I want to do one.
Did you not do one yet? I'm sorry. I was just about ready to make my joke about finishing this podcast.
Yeah, but you can do that. You can do that in a moment. But this tip is almost to myself because I keep forgetting about it. Like, as soon as I find some form of vibe, I just need to get some skeleton structure down, like some form of beginning, middle, and end. It doesn't matter if it's not, perfect to start with, because otherwise I'm just stuck in the loop. That's like my best way of just getting some form of track down, because then I know it's going to be something.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Well, I'm not too sure how to finish this podcast. How do
Good
you
one.
finish it? Been waiting 2.5 hours to make that joke, which I already made at the start before we even hit record. Okay, well, I guess we can wrap up there then, shall we? I think we've covered a lot of healthy ground there. Thanks, everyone. You've been watching Compress It Like an Idiot on the Ned Rush YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. Say goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Everyone.
Goodbye.
All right, nice.